Hello and welcome back to Forgotten Fronts. Today we're going to be doing a quick intro as we're continuing an earlier mission, and shortly we'll be returning back to Howard's Luck Var. As we begin the scenario, I pause to look over the field. Elevating the camera, you can see the defensive blockers knowers going well so far. No rebel units are moving in. Towards our center, a similar situation is seen. To our right flank, the line begins to bend as the Confederates have put a huge amount of pressure on it. But there is nothing to worry about, as there's a brigade and a half in reserve to deploy if necessary. Passing over to the left side, you can see there's a cannon battery in reserve as well, but we can tell it hasn't been there for very long as it hasn't given or taken any casualties. Going over to our left side, we can see the brigade is holding firm, with another brigade holding our left flank, not even deployed, and there's one regiment and cannon battery in reserve. But just beyond our position, there's at least two brigades of rebel infantry ready to strike our far left flank. As our center is being hit very hard by the rebel attack, I move over the battery from our right flank to our center to bombard the attacking rebels and hopefully the rebels to our left flank, lining them up with another battery that's already there to form a grand battery of sorts, taking command of them as I move into position. Going into the firefight, we can see that our lines are beginning to shatter as one regiment withdraws, and so the two regiments nearby fire into its flank. A similar situation is playing out in our center as the 40th Virginia charges one of our regiments and then shatters it, and the regiment nearby, I tell them to charge as there's no way they can escape in time. All the while, the nearby cannon attempts to escape the nearby melee. And so, seeing the dire situation that our line is in, I move to our reserves and quickly decide to move in our brigade of infantry and shuffle them towards the center of our line, just in case if our center collapses, which is a real risk at this point as the rebels are continuing to push forward and spearhead to our center of our line. But as I move them into position, I only see 3 of the 4 flags. That's because one of the regiments deployed right on top of the other, which is a bit strange and doesn't normally happen. While I move them, I split off the 33rd Massachusetts to support our right flank in case the rebels push again, splitting them off from the rest of the brigade. As the brigade moves into position, I assess the defenses on Blockers Knoll once again, and begin to consider moving back from our second line of defenses to the third fence post line, as we're not holding the victory point, and at this point all we're doing is holding the flank, and whatever units are there are getting their flank shot up. In the meantime, I move up one of our regiments to rally and rest near one of our generals. While moving over to our left flank, we can see that more rebel units are moving into attack. Many of the forces that previously occupied our center have rallied, but are in inferior positions than originally. One of those units is a cannon that's about face and preparing to open fire canister into the rebel ranks. While on our left flank, the rebels have yet to move into attack, but I'm considering sending in our reserves to support our center, as the rebels are hitting very hard there. In the meantime, I'm forming our brigade on the extreme left flank into line in case the rebels move into attack. Moving back into our center, we can see one regiment has moved up, and the cannons that I moved from our left flank have finally arrived. But more rebel forces are moving in to attack our center, but with a reformed line they'll take heavy casualties as they advance. On the right flank, more rebel units are moving into attack. As we can see, about a brigade of troops are moving into attack, including the Louisiana Tigers again are moving in. While rebels move in from the banks of the Rock Creek, I move our forces into defensive positions of the fence posts nearby, as well as moving in reformed regiments nearby. In our center, things are looking dire as the rebels have reorganized for another attack. They have broken our second defensive line in the knoll, opening fire on the flank of the 75th Ohio, who have taken heavy casualties and eventually rout. But luckily enough, there's nearby regiments to take their place and fire at the attacking rebels. Including the 26th Wisconsin and the 107th Ohio. In the center of our lines, things continue to look dire as I force to reform one of the units that are beginning to withdraw. Just after this, I look over to our mass cannon battery, and the new battery that's moved up has inflicted its first casualty. Unfortunately, I don't check the other battery, so we don't get to see the full damage they inflicted. Soon enough, I deploy a reserve into the defensive position of the corner of the field, in the center of the road, just in case the rebels move into attack. More units are rushing towards the second line of fences, which forms our second line of defense on Blockers Knoll, including the 107th Ohio, who are extremely tired, and so in the grand scheme of things I hope to replace them with a more refreshed regiment. In an effort to secure my flank, moving up the two relatively fresh regiments of the 119th New York and 33rd Massachusetts to secure my flank by the two houses, the fence by Rock Creek. In the meantime, the firefight in our center carries on, with more rebel regiments moving in. Luckily enough, we have two regiments nearby to fire into their flanks as they advance towards our line, causing them severe casualties. Fortunately, General Ames is caught in the middle of the entire engagement, caught behind rebel lines, and so I have to maneuver him carefully around the rebel regiments to get him to our second line of defense. Unfortunately, in the meantime, the rebels begin to pour flanking fire into the regiments of the second line of defense. In the meantime, a more dire situation is appearing in our center of our line, as more rebel regiments move up to attack, breaking the 82nd Illinois gap in our line. But fortunately enough, they quickly regroup, decide to put them in reserve, moving up the 134th New York to replace them. However, they are not, they leaving the gap in our line to stay for a longer period of time than necessary, while more rebel forces move in to exploit the gap in our line. So I formed them into column, moving them up at the double quick, getting them as tired as the 82nd Illinois, thus defeating the purpose of replacing them in the first place. At the same time, the rebel units move up and exploit the gap in our line, firing into the flanks of the 157th New York, who are already uneasy and are being attacked from the front. So I reform our line with the 134th New York and the 157th New York to fill in the gap in our line, but unfortunately at the same time, expose our flanks to the units attacking our front, which are luckily smaller regiments. Moving back to our right flank, I decide to move in a cannon to fill in the gap in our line, to fire a canister at the advancing rebel forces. In the meantime, I decide to move up the spare battery, fall in line with the other batteries to allow them to have the same range and effect on the rebel attack. In the meantime, the cannon reaches its position to open fire upon the rebels and quickly begins to unlimber, fire into the rebels' rear as they turned around to fire on the flanks and rear of our own troops. Have to move around the 58th New York, who in this attack have their rear exposed, denying the flank of the troops in the second line of defense on Blockers Knoll. As the 58th New York gets into position, reform units from Gordon's brigade move in across the bridge in Rock Creek, including the Louisiana Tigers. And so I move over General Ames to rally the forces nearest to the bridge as they're the most at risk. At the same time, I move the 107th Ohio over to the side so more of its ranks can fire. Around this time, the single gun that I moved up to reinforce the gap was forced back by the heavy rebel fire. And even worse news, the attack on our left begins in earnest, and our forces are caught off guard. I go over to the 157th New York and order them to reform. At the same time, the battery in our rear moves up to join the other two batteries, and our line appears to be holding firm. Massive casualties on both sides. But more rebel forces are moving on our right flank, and our regiments are beginning to get disorganized as they squish into one another. And at the same, right now, I move up the 119th New York to support the forces nearby the bridge, and move in the 33rd Massachusetts to a second line of defense nearby the pathway by the bridge, just in case they break through. And now I'm checking over our cannons, who aren't doing particularly well at the time. Another precautionary measure I do is I move Smith's brigade towards the center of our left flank, moving him up in column formation to make sure he arrives there relatively quickly. But at this point, our lines are becoming strained. Here we see Smith's brigade moving up, and our cannons firing, blasting the rebels away, pouring heavy shell fire into their ranks as explosions rain shrapnel from above. And we see the 119th New York moving into position, and they will play a key role in holding back several rebel regiments throughout this fight. Spoilers. But right now they'll be pouring flanking fire as the rebels advancing at Rock Creek, and so I halt them in a really good position. And thus their stand begins. But our forces are beginning to be overwhelmed by the bridge, as more rebel forces move in flanking them. And so I find whatever units I can to fill in whatever gaps we have, including the 17th Connecticut moving in to fill in that massive gap in our line. In the real battle, they are skirmishing, light infantry units. Meanwhile, on our left flank, the 157th New York withdraws, putting a massive gap in our line, and so I have to move forth the 82nd Illinois to fill in the gap. Remember, these were the forces that were retired from earlier. In the meantime, the second unit that I used to fill in the gap from earlier is beginning to take heavy casualties as many of the companies on the left flank are being absolutely decimated. Or half would probably be a bit appropriate. In the meantime, I'm preparing the rest of, I believe, Krasnowski's brigade. It's been a while since I've played this. To form into line so we can receive the rebel troops if necessary. And now we can see that our entire center has been shattered, and a massive gap has formed in front of our cannon battery, but the rebels will pay for this in the form of mass canister fire into their ranks as they advance any farther forward. I'm shuffling over the 17th Connecticut to not block off the nearby regiment. But there's no use as more troops are pouring over the bridge, led by General Avery, as more troops in the background are moving around Rock Creek, led by General Hay. And the fierce Louisiana Tigers are moving out and doing a particularly interesting thing as I look over our map to make sure that our promised reinforcements are here, but they are here, but they aren't moving. The 12th Corps sits in reserve. And now the fierce Louisiana Tigers do an 18th century style charge towards us at the walk. We advanced slowly with bayonets leveled at the Yankees, yelling like men possessed. We pushed them back, despite their superior fire and our show of discipline. With the rallying cries of Avery and the covering fire of the nearby regiment, the Louisiana Tigers advance, showing no sign of stalling. All the while taking heavy fire as they advance. Some of the German soldiers after the charge would state that they didn't even flinch as they moved forward. This action being a testament of the Louisiana Tigers' reputation. This so amazed me as I saw it, I had to stop and stare at it for a few minutes before continuing with the rest of the battle. But this amazement soon turned to dread as they advanced so close to my regiment that it has to turn around, exposing its flank to the rest of the rebel regiments, and endangering the 119th New York in the forest, which is a smaller regiment. The 33rd Massachusetts forms line and prepares to open fire on the Louisiana Tigers as soon as the 153rd Pennsylvania gets out of the way. But I can't stare at the valor of some units while ignoring the rest of my line for long, and so I have to go over to the center and left of our line. In the center, things appear to be improving, as in the open, the rebels stand little chance, as one of their regiments falls back, helped along by the heavy shell fire they're taking from the nearby masked battery. But the situation on our left flank is also worrisome, as our forces begin to fall back, and a fresh column advances.
Keep up your fire, men! We will soon push the these offenses. Cossack Clemens and Barker. It's a whole division! Run up! Go to General Smith and tell him that more rebel troops are moving up, and to put his brigade into whatever defensive positions he can find immediately.
But just like the general spotted, a fresh column of rebel forces are approaching our left flank. The forces already engaged, giving the rebel yell in support, as well as a nearby commanding officer giving rallying cries. And so now I route whatever forces are available in reserve into close defensive positions, like the triangle field, putting troops on the two sides of the point of the field. As I know now, our trial has now just begun, as we're already struggling to hold the line, as well as moving a regiment to reinforce Krasnowski's brigade on our far left flank. As I prepare the second line of defense, I check on Blocker's Knoll. As we arrive at Blocker's Knoll, we can see the rebels are continuing their attack. They're sustaining heavy casualties due to our mass fire and the supporting fire of our mass battery, putting a hail of shells overhead. And so I return back to the left flank, where the fresh column has just arrived, moving the troops in the triangular field into line, and moving them to face a new threat. I also move the 55th Ohio into line as well, facing them towards the rebel attack and hoping that their first rank isn't blocked by the regiment in front of them. The nearby cannon battery is also forming up to fire upon the rebel attackers. The two fresh regiments that I moved to reinforce Krasnowski's brigade on our far left flank also arrive in time. Despite the rebel attack, our general remains defiantly in front of our lines. Moving back to the center of our line, one regiment has pierced past the fence lines, and in response I shuffle around the 134th New York, fire upon them, but they have taken heavy casualties, so I move up the 55th Ohio to move in to replace them once they withdraw, as I know they soon will. Nearby, the 42nd Virginia is making for the gap in our line, to attempt to move in and attack our cannon. I swivel the 61st Ohio to fire into their flanks so the rebel forces advance. Around the same time, I move up the 54th New York to fill in the gap. In the meantime, another rebel thrust by Rock Creek is being held off by our infantry. Our troops are so far holding the line on our left flank despite the new rebel forces moving in. Go around to fire at advancing rebel regiments as they make for our mass battery. As I move forward the 73rd Ohio to support our battery, the rebels appear to be advancing towards our artillery commander, Osborne, and so I begin to move up the 73rd Ohio at the double. Despite their heavy casualties and their low unit training, the 134th New York is holding the line defiantly despite being shot in their front and flank. More rebel brigades come pouring in from the north from Ewell's corps, pushing it in a column into the center of our line, the weakest point, where cover is few and far between, in the large farm fields. Thankfully, the 55th Ohio has nearly reached their position right behind them, giving them well-needed relief. Moving forth the 54th New York to fill in the gap in between our lines and our battery, the 73rd Ohio is nearby, moving up to support the battery as well. The rebel regiment that moved up to attack the batteries is being ripped apart by canister fire, but as the 73rd Ohio arrives, I arrest them before sending them into the fray. The 50th Virginia, in their attempt to attack our battery, are taking heavy canister fire that's ripping through their ranks, as well as flanking fire from the nearby 61st Ohio. Although, despite superior fire, they hold the line regardless. And as more of our regiments move in, more fire is threatened, while more rebel forces are moving in despite heavy shell fire from our cannon. More and more rebel forces are moving in to attack our left flank, one regiment advancing towards Krasnowski's brigade, and so I advance the 27th Pennsylvania to support them, forming them into line to quickly respond to any breaking units. Advance the forces in the triangle field to get them in line with the nearby regiments outside of it, allow us to hold the center more easily. Moving back to the center of our line, more rebel regiments are moving to attack our battery. As a result, they take advantage of the gap in our line, flanking some of our infantry by taking canister fire. And so I move in the 73rd Ohio to fill in the gap between our line and the battery, being careful not to get in the way of the cannon so they can continue pouring canister fire into the rebel ranks. one of the rebel regiments takes advantage of the gap in our line, advancing slowly with bayonets leveled at two of our regiments, who are nearly exhausted from constant battle. As soon as they take rifle fire, they break into a run, and then with 1 meter between them, they charge them, our regiment firing a volley to attempt to get them away at the last possible moment, however failing, as a rebel yell permeates the air, which is soon caught in a maelstrom of steel. However, due to their fatigue and low training, they don't stand long. Despite the few casualties they've taken this day, rebels being so close, our troops refuse to pour supporting fire into their ranks, and so they are quickly broken. After only a short melee, their panicked attempt to escape, many of the troops are taken prisoner, and so the regiment is forced to surrender, as the rebels quickly charge the 134th New York, who have taken heavy casualties in the fight so far, and so don't stand long. However, in their retreat, they are able to escape without surrendering. The two regiments are broken, the cannons open up with canister fire once again into the rebel ranks, seeing the recent prisoners from nearby melees. The canister cuts down friend and foe alike. They charged in, forcing the Yankee regiment to surrender. As they began to retrace towards our rear, we charged a nearby depleted regiment. After a short melee, we pushed them back as well. As they ran, they revealed the cannon battery. Those who saw this immediately threw themselves to the ground. As they opened fire, the prisoners of our own men were cut down with canister fire. As nearby regiments withdraw, the rebel regiment is set upon by our mass batteries firing canister fire, as well as a nearby regiment firing flanking fire into them. The close range recover the status of the other parts of our line. While I'm doing this, we can see in the background in the top left-hand corner, one of our regiments is being charged, as the rebels continue their attack on our left. Moving to our left, we can see the 82nd Illinois has regrouped, but since they're so tired, we don't want to put them in the fray quite yet, moving them to rally and rest by one of our officers. In the meantime, the melee continues on our left, and the 27th Pennsylvania attempts to fire, supporting fire into them, but since they risk hitting our own men, they don't do it for very long. Meanwhile, two regiments move to attack our left flank. Moving back to the center of our line, we can see more rebel forces are advancing. As our battery continues to fire, supporting fire into them. I was still quite panicked from the attack on our left, and so I haven't paid much attention to the deployment of the troops on our right, and so many of them are deployed poorly, the hunt into column formation. But in the meantime, the rebels make another thrust over Rock Creek Bridge, and so the officer has to rally the troops in the woods, defending it.
We have to get out of here, or we'll be surrounded. Keep your damn heads down. I won't need to shoot anyone who runs, for anyone who dies will be cut to ribbons if you leave the forest. We're staying here.
And with the brutal words of the commander, the regiment regroups and holds. Noticing the 58th New York is way out of position in front of our lines, I attempt to move them back, but the pathing gets a little bit messy, and the regiment runs across the enemy lines, getting shot up pretty badly. Eventually the fire from the rebel forces in what used to be our second line of defense on Blockers Knoll becomes too great, and the regiment routs. Moving back to the center of our line, the rebels are taking advantage of the lack of regiments there, and are advancing, attempting to overwhelm our line. Thankfully enough, the mass battery of our cannons is pouring canister fire, holding them back by themselves there. The 74th Pennsylvania, which is in front of our mass battery, rushes to get out of their way, as they don't want to be mistaken as rebels themselves and blown away by canister. But then two rebel regiments move forward, aiming to capture many of the guns of the battery and the battery commander, General Osborne. And so in retaliation, I move forward the 73rd Ohio, countercharging the nearest regiment before it reaches General Osborne, while the other regiment gets caught up in another one of our regiments. Few charged forth towards the rebels, threatening General Osborne. Then there was a short and vicious melee. At one point I rushed to stand at peril. In the melee I lost my rifle. Taking a bayonet I found in the ground, I stabbed him in the chest, ripping the colors from the staff as he fell to the ground. The Ohio rushed forward, saving General Osborne from certain capture, and after a short but vicious melee we easily pushed them back. But at the same time our fellow regiment is pushed back, but in doing so opened themselves to canister fire. Covered by the supporting canister fire from the nearby mass battery, our regiment advanced towards the next rebel regiment, who are attempting futilely to take cover behind the nearby fence post. A nearby officer attempts to rally them, telling them to stand their ground, as our regiment approaches ever closer, moving up at the double as canister rips through their ranks. As our men come too close, the officer withdraws, as the rebels prepare for melee combat. A nearby rebel regiment attempts to move up to support them, but then our double quick is broken as a call to charge is sounded, and our men rush forward with bayonets fixed. Just before we enter melee, the cannons fire a few more shots of canister into the rebel regiment, blowing away their rightmost company, and another intense melee begins. Close-range rifle shots, bayonets, bullets, bowie knives, and the butts of rifles being used as clubs in the combat. And when all else fails, fists and teeth are also used in the combat. Despite the nearby regiment and officer, they break, and our regiment takes position on the fence post, firing upon a nearby rebel regiment that moved up nearby. Moving back to our left flank, the rebels have finally used the 3 brigades on their far right flank to attack us, and so now I have to make a desperate defense using Krasnowski's brigade and whatever forces that have rallied nearby, positioning them on the nearby fences to make a desperate defense, moving the majority of them along the fence post on our far left wing, with whatever forces I can put in reserve in the triangle field towards the center of our line. A desperate plan of mine was to use the masked battery to fire canister fire to free up infantry units to move to other points in our line. But as the forces move in, our soldiers are outnumbered 10 to 1, and most of the soldiers attacking us are still quite fresh, as they stood the majority of the battle, watching over our left flank, not doing anything. Thankfully, around the same time, the situation on our right flank and center have calmed down quite significantly, so I'm able to move some of the reserves from there to the left wing, where they're desperately needed. Showing how absolutely desperate our defense is, I have to use the 157th New York, who are still wavering from their earlier combat, putting them with our forces selected to hold the line on our flank. One of the more better troops on our line is the 82nd Illinois, who are only slightly winded and not actually about to break. Meanwhile, on our right flank, the 119th New York are still getting to their stalwart defense of the forest by the bridge, holding off 3 regiments of rebel units, despite me having to come over and tell them to regroup every so often. Going back to our left flank, things are degrading into chaos as rebel units charge our infantry. And in the melee, the 27th Pennsylvania has forced one of the rebel regiments to surrender, but then gets engaged in melee once again. However, elsewhere other regiments are beginning to withdraw without even being engaged, as the rebels come in as a tidal wave. A few desperate forces on our left begin to crumble very quickly, and so I have to commit to our second line by the triangle field. Its flanks covered by the masked battery. Meanwhile, on the right flank, things are still pretty calm, as the 119th New York holds the line, holding 3 regiments in the forest, and the other regiments farther to the left of the line don't dare to move up without support. Meanwhile, on our left flank, the troops put up on our first line to hold our left flank that were easily broken through begin to regroup, and so I decided to move them up to our second line of defense, as the first line was quickly overrun. But while his forces withdraw, Custer stands still, waiting for the last of his men to leave before he moves an inch. Either an act of bravery, stupidity, or defiance. The way back, passing a felled officer, and regrouping with another as soon as he reaches the triangle field. Our forces were in the defensive line of the triangle field. They take heavy shell fire. They maneuver into defensive positions that were quickly taken out. Gray Tide advances ever further. Meanwhile, towards the center of our line, regiments begin to withdraw. However, that exposes them to the mass batteries of our artillery, firing canister into their ranks, easily holding them off, as nearby forces wheel about to fire on the new advancing forces. This has the unfortunate side effect of presenting their flanks to the old forces they were already engaged with. In the meantime, the last of my forces arrive at the second line of defense. In an effort to help hold the line longer, I move officers around to various points in line to help rally the forces already there. But unfortunately, the forces at the head of our line are exposing their flanks too far away, and their flank is immediately charged by advancing rebel units. In the meantime, I tell whatever forces I have in reserve to move up to support the cannons, in case the rebels move up to charge. Moving over to the center of our line once again. Rebels seeing the attack on the left move in to attack, and so I move into 58th New York, a small regiment, to move forward and attack a rebel regiment that formed up by the fence post that is beginning to withdraw, charging and breaking them in a short melee, probably encouraged by a nearby rebel regiment that withdrew, with an officer following suit nearby. This only helps to decrease the threat on our right flank, as both our regiment and their regiment withdraw simultaneously. We're moving farther to our right. The 119th finally break, but that's not the end of their work this day, as I move them up to the fence post by the houses. Moving back to our left flank, the situation is only getting worse as all the regiments by our batteries withdrew. The silver lining I can see so far is many of the rebel regiments are withdrawing due to the canister fire from our masked battery. However, I move up more of our infantry to fill in the gaps in between our battery, as it also is beginning to withdraw at this point. Due to the constant pressure of rebel attacks, our troops quickly take cover and open a devastating fire upon the attacking rebel units. Moving to the center of our line, the rebels are faring a little better, as they're being pinned down by one of our units, with two others nearby them, ready to support their attack. Moving back to the left of our line, the ad hoc line that we formed in the triangle field is quickly breached by the wave of rebel units, attacking, flanking around the north end, while one of the guns shifted around to fire upon the advancing rebels. In the meantime, I rush up more units to support our battery, as well as filling in whatever gaps are left in the line at the triangle field. As the tide of rebels advance further, threatening to pierce our line, they move down to the south side of the line. 3 units are threatening to flank there as well. But right now, my main concern is in the north, so I focus my attention there. The line is becoming more and more frayed as the rebels continue their attack. Opening my map, I look for any possible reinforcements or any reserves from my line. We can see the 12th Corps in the rear, but they are not moving up, and no reinforcements under my command. And so I close my map once again, dealing with the continuing shattering of our line as more of our units retreat to the rear. In the meantime, more supply lines are moving up to desperately try to supply our units. Moving across our line, we can see that the rebel attacks have stopped in our center, but as we arrive on our right flank, they have begun anew, against whatever weak forces already stationed.
I'm hit! Fall back, man! 9! I don't want to be left here! Come back, lads! We stood together shoulder to shoulder in the fatherland, only to be torn apart here!
As I open up my map, I notice the demoralizing sight that there is an almost infinite amount of rebels moving to surround our corps. At the same time, we can see nearby that Buford's cavalry division has formed up behind the Rock Creek, and 12th Corps is in reserve nearby. The left flank continuing to fray as the right flank, with whatever few troops are there, holds defiantly against whatever rebels attack. And in the center, nothing happens as a massive gap forms in our line, as more reserves are pulled to the left flank. My plan now shifts from holding the line here to regrouping across the Rock Creek. My massed cannon batteries are holding off the rebel units, holding them off in a hail of canister fire, and thus becomes the last stable part of our line. And at this point, the last of our units know the triangle field break. Overwhelmed by the rebel fire, they begin to withdraw, and eventually they break. As more and more rebel units advance, their fresh units leapfrogging over their tired units. My officers, in a vain attempt to rally our troops, my troops ignore them and run past them, then relinquish the first line of the triangle field to the rebels, but then form up in the second line. However, the last remaining unit on the line gets charged by the rebel forces. In the meantime, I try to withdraw our artillery to stop them from being captured by the advancing rebel forces. Once the final unit on the first line of defense of the triangle field gets pushed back, the 27th Pennsylvania, in confusion, begins to fall back towards the rebels. I quickly tell them to turn about and stop withdrawing, moving them to the cover of the nearby fences. Then I have another cursory glance over our line, as I check over the right flank is still holding despite more rebel forces moving in to attack them, before returning to the mess of the left flank, where I move the last of our units to the second line of defenses on the triangle field. In the meantime, one of our cannons, in a panic withdraws towards the line of the rebels. In the meantime, we can see the heroic defense of one of our regiments holding off at least 6 of the rebels. The withdrawal of our artillery put a massive gap in our lines that the rebels will most definitely exploit. 2 of their regiments move up to do just that. Then I spot a major general in the center of our line. Panic slightly, thinking that it's Howard, but no, it's not. It's General Reynolds, who probably should be dead in the real battle by now. In the meantime, one of our units advances too far north of the triangle field and gets caught up in a melee with the rebels. In the meantime, I fall back the final battery from our mass battery, behind the fence post to give them more time to shoot canister at the enemy, only opening up a larger gap in our line for the rebels to exploit. In the meantime, our unit that was caught up in the melee is forced to retreat, exposing the flank of the final units on the triangle field. Supply wagons weave in and out of our units as the line eventually collapses into disarray. The line had broken down. We were in a panic as the rebels came in like a grey wave, washing down our men as we fled. Now hold on to your hats, as we're going to be doing a play-by-play of the line's collapse and our retreat to Rock Creek. While we're doing this, we're going to be doing this in fast motion. So the plan is, we're going to retreat to the Rock Creek and regroup with Buford's cavalry, which will allow us to hold for that little bit longer. At one point I look at the units of the 1st Corps, who aren't being attacked at all, and I realize that the units that were supposed to be attacking them are attacking us instead. So originally I was supposed to move our units to the next line of fences, across the Carlisle Road to form a sort of L shape, and using Buford's cavalry to hold our flank, but by now most of our units have utterly collapsed. And as most of our units are withdrawing over the Rock Creek, I decide to regroup there instead. Later on I note with annoyance that the 12th Corps has moved up, but are not moving up to help us in any way. Seeing a unit on the map under my command near them gave me hope, but it was only a routing unit, and so I go back to the front line. Going over to our right flank, attempt to do some sort of counterattack to push back the final rebel unit there, in order to free up these units to cover the units withdrawing on our left flank. But the situation on our left flank continues to deteriorate, as some of the units I moved over Rock Creek get caught out of position and surrounded by the rebel units attacking, quickly breaking before they even get engaged. But I still move up more units to the fences to help our battery to hold the line. Then a rebel unit charges forward, breaking 2 of the guns off from our battery, and I realize that this plan isn't feasible. So looking over at the fresh troops of Buford's cavalry, I decide to pull back to join them on the other side of Rock Creek, encouraged by the final collapse of our units on the left flank. Seeing the collapse of the final units on our left flank, I note that Krasnowski's brigade would get utterly surrounded if they stay there, so I pull them back behind the houses just across the creek. I believe it's the 73rd Pennsylvania, in their retreat across Rock Creek, from the left flank, stop many times to fire upon rebel units from the cover of the orchard, before I finally tell them to withdraw properly. But the retreat quickly turns into disarray, and the final unit across is General Osborne of the U.S. Artillery. The general was able to rally some of the elements of the corps by some houses on the bank of Rock Creek. Buford's cavalry nearby made their disappointment obvious by yelling things like, "Scratch another one for the 11th. Now the retreat across Rock Creek is in full effect, and our units cross the creek in various degrees of cohesion, as the rebels continue their attack into our left flank. And my plan is to hold here, to take cover behind the fence posts and the stream slowing any rebel advances, while Buford's cavalry supports us. And so I begin to take cover behind the fence post as the rest of my units make their way across the creek. Many of the troops and general staff will go through the farmstead to our front. The only advantage we have here is the good position and Buford's fresh cavalry nearby to support us. Many of the troops from the right flank are still in line formation, falling back casually, as they don't know the gravity of the situation so far. All except for the 33rd Massachusetts, who ironically were the farthest right of our line, who advance in column at the double quick across the creek, but in doing so become extremely tired and their morale as a consequence takes a hit as well. However, the other divisions nearby form into column and begin to advance quickly as they see the onslaught of rebels on the left. Opening up my map, I can see the 1st Corps units on our far left flank are finally being attacked, now that many of the units from the rebels nearby have been freed up since my corps has been pushed back. But they might have a higher chance of holding since they have relatively good cover, however they are still isolated. Returning to our line, Beaver's cavalry goes in the battle line, seeing the rebel advance into range. They'll be significant help since their troops are still fresh and well organized. However, they're feeling about the 11th Corps' withdrawal. In the meantime, the 157th New York is doing a delaying action in the orchard, holding back at least 2 rebel regiments, allowing a nearby cannon to get across the river, or creek. Finally, the relatively fresh troops on the right side have finally arrived, moving across the creek at the double in column, before finally the 157th New York is ordered to fall back by General Osborne of the artillery. However, in their organized withdrawal, they panic and then eventually break. Meanwhile, on our left flank, the 1st Squadron of Beaver's cavalry becomes engaged with the rebels. With their breech-loading carbines, they'll be able to put a lot of fire on the rebels. Since they're dismounted cavalry, they won't be able to hold for long, since there's so many rebel units moving into attack. Meanwhile, the last of my combat units are crossing the creek, and taking up positions behind the fences. As they cross, they're overseen by General Osborne of the artillery. However, as the 107th Ohio passes him by, their officer warns him that more rebels are coming down the street, and that he should retreat across the creek. He takes up their warning and follows suit, and by one of Beaver's cavalry regiments, rallying them to stand. In the meantime, as the rebels attack, they take heavy shell fire from Caleb's battery and the remaining guns from our batteries. This doesn't even phase their attack, and so our men are continuing to take up their positions by the fences. One of my units that I tell to advance into cover tries to advance into the orchard, but I quickly tell them to stop. In the meantime, the 107th Ohio finally make it across the creek, but the rebels are not too far behind them. Behind them, one of our guns is right in front of the rebels, also rushing to get across the creek before they are captured. The 107th Ohio finally make it to our lines. I move them to the rear to rest up, while I move the 82nd Ohio to take up their place in front of the line, as they're more fresh. And in the meantime, manages to make it across the stream, despite being in bayonet range of the rebels, hearing the rebel yell as they crack their whips, trying to get their limber across the creek, and their valuable ammunition from rebel capture. Meanwhile, Beaver's cavalry is causing extreme casualties to the rebel advance. The consequence of this, the majority of the rebel attackers are moving to attack my men opposed to his. Opening up the map once again, we can see that the 1st Corps troops are beginning to be pushed back from their position to the north. However, the longer that Beaver's cavalry holds, the more casualties that Caleb and our batteries can inflict upon the rebel forces advancing upon us. I'm moving more and more of my forces to take up defensive positions by the bridge on the right side of the houses. All the while, the attack on the left side of the houses continues on, with the rebels attacking Beaver's cavalry, and at the same time maneuvering men around the houses to attack us again. Some of the rebels even moving in and amongst the houses to attack us. In response to this, I move 2 of our cannons up to the front to the fences to open fire canister upon them. Despite the heavy fire they're putting out on the rebels, Beaver's cavalry is taking heavy casualties from the massed regiments attacking his position. Beaver himself, riding amongst his cavalry, yelling rallying words from horseback to them. Despite the heavy fire they're under, as more rebel units move in, his position becomes even more tenuous. Moving back to our part of the line, we're about to feel the entire brunt of the Confederate attack once again. Confederate forces advancing through the houses, into a run, hoping to capture General Reynolds, but he escapes just in time as the troops from across the creek open fire and warn him of his impending danger. As the rebels approach and General Reynolds gets out of the way, our 2 regiments nearest give them everything they have, opening a devastating volley on the advancing rebel forces. However, this is not enough, and they continue their charge, getting to the surface of the bridge before charging one of our regiments. As they approach, they take surprisingly few casualties. However, in the meantime, more rebel forces advance, and so I move the remaining forces into defensive positions, including the one to the farthest right flank, into line, as well as unlimbing a nearby cannon. However, the sudden buildup of rebel forces on the right flank surprised both generals. Consequently, both formed line near the bridge, tangling their forces together. blocking their line of fire. And so in desperation, I had to move my forces away from Buford's cavalry to allow them to open fire. But in doing that, the rebels charged the next regiment by the bridge. The sudden appearance of the massive rebel forces on the right wing unnerved some of the nearby units so much they began to withdraw, but I quickly tell them to reform, moving them back along the fence line where they previously stood. Meanwhile, more rebel forces advanced to Buford's cavalry, taking extreme casualties as they attempt to cross the creek under heavy carbine fire. But the rebel fire from the other bank causes the cavalry extreme casualties. Moving back to where most of our units are positioned, another rebel unit goes over the bank and encounters a hail of fire. The Federals were lit. We chased after them. When we pressed the bank of the creek, we met a hail of carbine. You can imagine the surprise on their faces. As they leave the creek, they face a wall of lead as a cavalry and a nearby infantry regiment fires upon them. However, there are more rebel regiments behind them, and the melee on the main road doesn't look good for us. But due to the threat of nearby rebel units, the cavalry soon after breaks, fleeing to the rear as the rebels continue to move forward. Our regiment of infantry has to hold the line basically by itself. Shortly after they break, our infantry also follows suit, as the melee has gone so poorly. And now I'm wondering how we're going to continue holding the line, or at least attempt to delay the Confederate advance longer. Meanwhile, on the left side of our line, Buford's cavalry is charged as well, and they force back one of his squadrons, putting another massive gap in our line, as more rebel units advance on his position. Some of the rebel regiments are pinned down by nearby artillery, buying us a few more precious moments. As the final squadron makes its stand, moving back to the right side of our line, the fire becomes too much for the one regiment that originally vanguarded the entire attack, and is pushed back. Now a combination of the 33rd Massachusetts and one of Buford's cavalry squadrons has to hold the entire line by itself. In the meantime, the 73rd Pennsylvania, with all its training, is able to regroup, forming a defensive line by one of the houses, with a cannon to support them. But two more rebel regiments charge across the creek, flanking the cavalry squadron, and pushing them back. However, the train slows them, and it takes quite some time for them to even move up, which allows Buford's cavalry to cover the retreat of one of our nearby cannon. Looking over our left flank, more of Buford's cavalry is being engaged and flanked, while some of our supplies move up in an attempt to supply our troops, not getting the message that they're in extreme danger and that the rebels have overrun our position. However, we can see that two of the rebel regiments have been pushed back. In the meantime, one of our regiments had been caught up in a vicious melee on our far right flank. But then I moved back, as I hope they hold the line longer, and tell one of the supply wagon that moved up to retreat, as there's no point in trying to supply our men, but only to keep our supplies safe. In the meantime, I go over to the 12th Corps, seeing that one of the regiments move forward. However, they're only in front of their division in column formation to move up, but have not been given the order to advance. Surveying the battlefield on our map, I see that the rebel commander, Robert E. Lee himself, has come to supervise this attack personally from what was our second line of defense on Blockers Knoll, which might be the reason why we're not doing too well. Returning to our lines, the Confederates continue their attack in almost blob-like formation, overwhelming the troops by the bridges. The only place where my soldiers stand are right by the nearby houses, and only our most elite units, and a few cannon. In the meantime, our general staff is forced back as well. Once again, a huge gap forms in our line as we don't have the regiments to cover the entire frontage. To retreat, some of our units retreat towards the Confederate lines, being captured almost immediately by waiting Confederates. But then, thankfully, we get some reinforcements from the 12th Corps, McDougal's brigade moves up to support us on our flank, which gets me hopeful that they will send more reinforcements up later on. This will help to relieve the troops on the right wing. However, it's not the most effective since there's few Confederate forces there. In the meantime, by one of the houses, the 72nd Pennsylvania is still holding off with the support of one of our cannon, being rallied by General Osborne and another general. However, the Confederate forces continue their advance, unimpeded by these forces waiting in defense. I open up my map once again to see if any more forces are moving up to support us, but no, alas, there is none. I still see forces from the 12th Corps formed up in column formation to move up quite easily, but they haven't moved an inch. And then the Confederates overwhelm our position, easily capturing our cannon. Meanwhile, on our left flank, Buford's cavalry has been shattered, all except for one regiment, who have been cut down entirely except for one company. And stand they will, under the intense fire of the two rebel regiments across the stream, almost into the last man. Moving to the center of our line, the rebels are pushing through like a balled-up hairy fist, shattering all in its wake and endangering our nearby commanders, easily overrunning the nearby position by the houses, endangering Commander Osborne, Dillinger, and Steinwehr, forcing them to withdraw. The last stable unit on this area of front is Caleb's artillery battery, which was supporting Buford's cavalry, raining shells in the advancing rebel forces. In the meantime, our supply wagons haven't heard that our position has been overrun and continue to try to make supply runs to our forces. Holding the flank of McDougal's brigade, the 33rd Massachusetts holds 5 rebel regiments at the bridge, under the watchful eye of General Reynolds. However, in the devastating fire, one regiment is able to stake around the 33rd, firing into their flank, and none of them notice, as more rebel regiments move to attack McDougal's brigade, however taking heavy casualties in doing so in the open ground, encountering fresh units. However, this doesn't impede the rebel advance as more and more forces advance to our position. Moving back to Cemetery Ridge, I go over to General O'Howard, who is successfully holding Cemetery Ridge long enough to acquire 15,000 points, more than enough to get us a major victory. Opening up our map, we can see that our entire line is shattered, exposing the elements of the 1st Corps on our far left flank, forcing them back. Returning to the battlefield, we can see that the rebel units are moving in to attack Caleb's artillery battery. Going over to where Buford's line is held, we can see that the rebels have wiped out or pushed back the Indiana cavalry, his other forces nearby unable to support them as they were holding the flank. In response to the shattering of our center, I moved the 33rd Massachusetts to deny the flank of McDougal's brigade. However, our troops, since they're under fire, are stubborn to move from the fence posts that are taking cover behind. Even while under take command, they decide to take really weird paths to their objective, suffering far more casualties than needed. Moving across our line, we can see that Caleb's battery is promptly getting attacked, while the other half of Buford's cavalry remains untouched by the rebel advances. As we reach the elements of the 1st Corps, they're being quickly pushed back from their position due to being exposed by our shattered line. And so we return back to our lines, where the last remaining regiment that is still under our command that hasn't shattered remains, the 33rd Massachusetts, while moving to the flank of McDougal's brigade, has halted, so I have to order them to move to the fence post on their flank once again. Meantime, we can see that General Osborne is standing perilously close to the rebels, and has surprisingly managed to evade capture. After successfully ordering them to their position, I move south towards the brick field and past it to where the 12th Corps is and still refuses to move from. Still seeing the one brigade out the front formed up and ready to move up to support our troops. But it appears at some point later on that one brigade has moved up to support McDougal's brigade. However, still forming up by Rock Creek, not being much help to the rest of our line. And we can still see that some of our supply wagons are trying to move up to give ammunition to our forces, but are quickly being pushed back by the rebel advance. Going back to the 33rd Massachusetts, we can see that large chunks have been taken out of the regiment due to the heavy fire they've been in so far. But thankfully they're still able to hold the line against the 3 rebel regiments moving in to attack the flank of McDougal's brigade. In the meantime, I withdraw General Osborne to where McDougal's brigade is waiting. Then moving farther over to our left, where General Steinwehr is telling Caleb's brigade to withdraw. Many of the cannons don't fall back far and become a tangled mess near the crossroads, as the two commanders argue over whether to stand or withdraw. All the while, the nearby homesteads are overwhelmed by swarms of rebel forces advancing further on, endangering both of the officers at the same time. At this point, I only look over the casualties of what we've taken so far, as there's not a lot I can really do at this point, as most of our regiments have been forced back, withdrawn, or absolutely routed. Some of the more high concentrations of rebel casualties are right by Rock Creek, just by the houses, and on the first and second line of Blockers Knoll, while generally continues to observe the attack through his field glasses from the safety of the rear of the line. Overlooking the casualties at Blockers Knoll, we can see that 3 officers have fallen, 2 rebels and 1 Union officer. Turning to McDougall's brigade and the 33rd Massachusetts, we can see that another brigade has moved up to support McDougall's, advancing over the Rock Creek, flanking the rebel attack. These fresh troops causing heavy casualties to the rebels out in the open, shooting at the rebels from the banks of the creek and the nearby force. But as a consequence of this, more rebel forces are shifting to attack McDougall's brigade, as well as the unknown 2nd Brigade of the 12th Corps. Zooming in, we can see that one of the regiments have captured one of the rebel officers, while advancing far in advance of his troops in the excitement of the very successful attack. And so this becomes the last stand of the 11th Corps, the 33rd Massachusetts is the last viable regiment to hold our line. And so I make one last look at our map to see if the 12th Corps is going to move up and support us. But alas, the 2 brigades that move forward are the only 2 that are going to come to our support. And so, closing our map, I go back to Caleb's brigade, where the 2 officers have been arguing so long the rebels have moved up to attack, putting both the battery and the 2 ammunition wagons nearby at risk. Thankfully, however, the rebels advancing to attack the battery have elected to use their muskets opposed to moving in with the bayonet, giving our cannons ample time to fire canister into their ranks. I will return back to the 2 brigades of the 12th Corps of the 33rd Massachusetts to see that huge amounts of rebel forces are advancing upon them, and the 3 of them are at risk of being surrounded, being cut off from the rest of the Union troops. And as the rebels move in to do the final death blow to our corps and the 2 brigades moving forward, we finally get a victory. Well, victory in quotation marks anyway. And now we're going to go over our forces, which I'm only going to do at the brigade level, as if we do it at the regimental level like we've been doing previously, we'd be here for hours. And now for adventures in time. Ah, there's the tent. It's nowhere near the rocks. I'll have to tell Talon about that later. Halt! Who goes there? A friend. I have a message for General Early from General Lee. Advance, friend, and be recognized. General, a visitor for you. A courier by the looks. Let him in a moment. Alright, I'll see him now. Good day, General. Here's the message. You must be the New English Observer, then. There's an engagement at Gettysburg. That's not part of the plan. We need to move immediately if we're to succeed. Sir, reports are the 11th Corps north of the town. Good. They won't hold. Then we can circle around McPherson's Ridge. I'm certain that a victory here will secure Her Majesty's interest in this officially. Anderson, sound the call to pack up and move immediately.